Welcome to American Dreams. I'm here today with Jason Earl. And Jason, welcome to today's show.
It's great to be here with you. Thanks.
So, Jason, for the listeners, can you give your background of, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Most of it was a big mistake. I started down this path of engineering, ended up in corporate finance, ran a startup company which sold to a private equity firm, and I went from private equity into academia. So I tell my students I didn't plan to be a teacher. I didn't study to be a teacher. This is all a big mistake. And I'm glad it turned out the way it did.
You know, it's interesting how sometimes we don't count on our paths. We just end up there. But tell me a little bit about what where did you graduate from with your degree in engineering?
So I started, BYU. I have a bachelor's and a master's in engineering.
Which engineering?
In structural engineering.
Structural, okay. Mm-hmm.
So my first job out of school was with ExxonMobil in New Orleans. I was an offshore structural engineer. So we built huge offshore oil platforms. We built pipelines and gas plants. And the interesting thing is I thought I was going to be doing engineering, but really it was project management on a massive scale. So I was spending anywhere between $20 to $30 million per month, which in Exxon terms is, just pennies. But there was a huge hole in my education because I didn't know how to hire and fire, how to manage budgets, how to track spending. And my boss pulled me into his office after about 6 months and said, "We need to send you to assertiveness training," which in Exxon terms means you're about this close to getting fired. And they sent me to this assertiveness training, which was only 2 days long, but it changed my life. It was a whole new perspective on what it means to really manage and lead. And I came back, changed up my entire team, got a whole new budget. We finished the project. And when I met with my boss, I said, "Paul, it's done. Everything's finished. It's to code, but just please don't fire me." And he looked at my overrun. I'd overspent by about $20 million. And I remember Paul saying, "Jason, fire you. We just spent an extra $20 million training you. Like, now we can actually use you." And so they sent me to business school at Tulane. So while I was working at Exxon, I went to Tulane for nights and weekends for 3 years, finished up the MBA. And that opened my mind to this whole new world of this combination of engineering and business.
Now you switched over from the energy field at Exxon into a private equity group. What transitioned you into that?
Really, I actually went to another mining company. It was called World Minerals. We just finished putting in the last offshore oil platform in California, right off the coast of Santa Barbara. And my next assignment was going to be in Africa. And I was a newly minted MBA, and I really wanted to find something in that Santa Barbara area. So this is going to date me a little, but I remember getting on monster.com and I typed in engineer, MBA, some crazy salary. And this job popped up with a company called World Minerals. And they were looking for someone who could do strategy, planning, and M&A. And I should not have been, I really wasn't qualified to get the job, but that MBA does all kinds of things, opens all kinds of doors. And so we took the job. We moved our family from New Orleans to Santa Barbara. And that's really where my education in finance took off. We had a really good CFO. He said, "Jason, the thing I like about you is I only have to tell you once and you get it. So I'm going to make a deal with you." Because he knew how clueless I was. He said, "You come in every Saturday morning from 8 to 12 and I'll teach you corporate finance." And he did for a year. I mean, I owe John Lichty a lot. He pretty much taught me everything I knew about how to value a company, how to acquire a company, how to really lead a team. So that was kind of the shift to finance.
The private equity, it's usually a lot of high-paced, focus on return for investors. And how long did you stick around at the firm there?
I was there almost 5 years, and I learned if you live by the acquisition, you pretty much die by the acquisition. So a big French company came and bought us. All of the senior management got golden parachutes, and I was just kind of stuck. Like there was a lot of pressure to perform, and the whole culture had kind of changed. And that's really when I looked at my own startup. I wanted to stay in the area. My wife wanted to stay in the area, and so we met with some local entrepreneurs, jumped into a startup. We had an angel investor there in the Santa Barbara area who was very patient, very generous, and that's how we got into the startup.
What field was this in?
It was back in my old roots in engineering. So we were designing high strength concrete, so mixed designs. To be honest, it was just, three of us engineers and a laptop, but we had an algorithm to optimize these mixed designs. And we started landing some pretty big projects. And then a venture capital firm in Beverly Hills took notice, and they introduced us to their people. And the next thing I knew, we were meeting with the New York Port Authority on the design for the Freedom Tower in New York. So that entire foundation, the core, the shear walls, that's all our concrete, super high strength, had all of these criteria that we had to meet. But it was an awesome experience. Watching a company grow from 3 people to 63 people in such a short time period was really fun.
So what led you then, after starting you're founding a company, growing it up to 63 people, why teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they were bringing on more and more people. And I think what happens with these VCs is they kind of put you down a track of spending so much that you've got to just have explosive growth. And so they brought in some really qualified people, people with like 30 years of management experience in that industry. And basically there's this feeling like you were the right person to start it, but you're not the right person to grow it. And it seemed like the next chapter was to move on. I had a good friend at BYU Idaho who said that there was a position. They were looking for someone with private equity experience who could also teach finance to engineers. And my wife was not excited about leaving Santa Barbara, but we went up to Idaho. We met Kim Clark, who was the president at the time. And there's just this overwhelming feeling like this was the next step. And so, we took a 90-degree turn into academia.
That's quite a move, Santa Barbara to Rexburg.
Yeah, and it was the middle of a winter. We left December 15th. I think we showed up right before Christmas, and there was like 6 feet of snow.
I'm just curious, how many winters did you last?
We lasted 5. Part of the deal with my wife was she wanted to have an indoor pool. She's like, if we can do that, I can survive the winters. And she ended up teaching a lot of kids in the community. There weren't a lot of pools in the area, so she ran the pool business. I taught at BYU Idaho, but we lasted 5 years before we came to BYU Hawaii.
Okay, so now you're back in the warmer climates at BYU Hawaii, and bring us up to date. What are you teaching at BYU Hawaii?
So I work in the Entrepreneurship Center. So we teach entrepreneurship classes. We also teach strategy classes for the business students. And surprisingly, our best students are not the typically business background students. They come from marine biology or elementary ed or one of these other areas, but they have an idea for a startup. And so it's been an awesome experience to kind of see it come together, the science side of it, the people side of it, and then a business model where the students can go back to their home countries and start their own business.
So business simulations, you've done some research in that area, and how did that come about?
When I first showed up at BYU Idaho, they had a simulation for the Business 101, the intro students. And I remember running this simulation, and it was tough. And I met with the department chair and I said, I think this is overkill. Like, I barely understand it, and I have an MBA. And I remember this guy said, you know what, you underestimate our students. They can do it. So I kind of just threw my students into it. Part of it was, you know, an instructor who was new to teaching, so I didn't really know how hard I could push my students. But they showed an amazing ability to perform. And the great thing about simulations is you can compare results across universities all over the world. And the next thing I know, we're getting a call from the CEO of the company in Chicago, and he's asking us, hey, when did you start an MBA program? And I said, these are undergraduates. And he's like, okay, are they seniors? I said, no, these are freshmen. He's like, no way. So he jumped on a plane. He came out to BYU Idaho, and he saw our students actually running the simulation, teaching with it. And yeah, he was so impressed. He let me join their team that actually runs these simulations for executive programs at HBS, at GE, at Caterpillar. So that was kind of that's how I kind of got into it. And I found it so fascinating that I did my dissertation on it. And we really looked at how to measure these gains in business knowledge and business acumen through simulations.
You know, it's interesting. This is a development that it used to be just a straight case study. And going with online business simulations, of course, the students are getting a different experience. But how do you grade an online business simulation in the classroom setting?
Yeah, well, you definitely don't grade it at first because it's really frustrating. And almost like when an aircraft simulation, the students crash it over and over again. But really, the two ways we measure it is one is with the balanced scorecard. So we're looking at their investments, not just in the company, but in the people, feedback from customers, and we also look at their financial performance. And then in addition to that, we ask them questions in between rounds. So every round simulates a year, and we can hit them with 10 or 12 different questions about, you know, if you were to make this change, what would be the impact on your competitor or your market share? And so I think one is really measuring business knowledge, and the other is measuring business acumen.
Thank you. Okay, so now I got that question for you. You got a student coming out of school, and they're saying, you know, I got all this great education. I'm going to go start a company, but I don't know where to start. So if you're advising one of your students how to go about taking their idea and implementing it into business, what advice would you give to them?
I think the biggest thing would be to identify the problem. Typically where there's a burning problem, there's a great opportunity. So if we could really ask the right questions, define the problem, and then find a solution in the form of a product or a service, that's the big step. And then once you've got that, now you can test it. We really like to set up small experiments, get it out there, get feedback from customers. And there's such great tools now, especially online, where for relatively low cost, you can get something out there either on Kickstarter or online with samples and start to get feedback.
How do you teach somebody to innovate? Is it natural, or is it an acquired skill?
I think it is natural, but I think it starts to go away. There's something with these students in their early 20s where they're actually pretty creative, and a lot of these great ideas, they're not coming from my staff. They're coming from the students. And yeah, I don't want to offend your audience, but I think the older we get, the less innovative and the less creative, because there appears to be more risk.
Well, I'll tell you, so the majority of this audience is young. The young entrepreneurs are looking for, you know, finding pathways, direction in life. If we walk out into the world today, let's spend a little bit of time on innovation. Okay, can you tell us about how innovation can help to create new markets?
Yeah, it's probably been most apparent in these developing countries that a lot of our students come from. Students here at BYU Hawaii come from over 70 countries around the world. And when we look at innovation there, it's typically not high end or really expensive. It's often fairly low end and it's really not great quality. But the telltale signs is that it's low cost, it's scalable, and it's serving non-consumers. What you're basically looking for is people who normally could never buy this thing suddenly have access to it. And a great example would be in Cambodia, where you just don't see beds. Like, people don't sleep on beds. Traditional beds are expensive, but there's an unmet need there. And if you had a way to develop a low cost bed that could actually be manufactured and made available, that would be an innovation for them. So it's not a fancy app. It's not 5G networked. It's finding that unmet need and that opportunity. And I think just a quick example, one that blew me away was in Mongolia. We've got quite a few students from Mongolia. And when you go out to visit, there are hotels there in the big city, but for a lot of these adventure tourists, there's no traditional motel or bed and breakfast. And so you find these people out in the countryside who take their gears or their yurts, and they put them on Airbnb. And so these people, they have smartphones, they have access to a 4G network, and they can make more off of a month of Airbnb than an entire year of selling yak or yak milk. And the customers love it. They pay $60 a night. They have an authentic, amazing experience. And it's a market creating innovation that it wasn't there, 4 or 5 years ago.
Managing risk. Yeah, this is an area that a lot of people that they go into business say, I want to start business, but I don't want to risk anything. Okay. And there's part of the inherent nature of business is to assume some type of risk. But how do you coach a person that's risk adverse in terms of moving forward and stepping into the future at unknown to solve their problem?
Yeah, that's a good point. We basically teach that not all risk is created equal. So we imagine it as a bunch of coat hangers that are kind of all tangled together. So if you can find a way to detangle or unbundle the risk and separate the financial risk from the people risk, from the technical risk, and then you can, once you've got that identified, you can basically find ways to mitigate that risk and push it off the table, like get it to someone else or eliminate it. And I think from the outside, entrepreneurship looks very risky. But when you talk to some of these successful entrepreneurs, they're actually highly risk adverse, and they've found incredible ways to eliminate or dramatically reduce the risk.
Let's take a personal case study. In your case, when you went out and founded the company with the high tolerance for the strength or the resistance, you stepped out. You took some venture money.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because we were poor and they were rich. That was the main reason.
All right.
But,
so,
yeah.
and there was some risk hedging in there, or what was it?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in using other people's money. Even if we had the capital available, there's 3 things that you should never risk, right? You should never risk your family, your faith, and your friendships. And so when I look at savings for my family or for the future education of my kids, that's just sacred. I wouldn't touch that. I would not want to risk that. Definitely, I would not want to take out a line of credit on my home and risk the house for my family. But I think if you can put something together that has real potential and you can outline what those risks are, and then go to people who appreciate what you're trying to do, they understand the risk and they're okay with it. I think that's really where you've got the right recipe for success. And in our case, it was an angel investor who had some experience with several startups in the area. He saw the potential, and I think it seemed risky, but we were also backing up all of our technology with patents. And he had those, in his name. He was going to have the intellectual property. So we really tried to show that we were going to do this over time, kind of scale the venture, but also only take on the money as we needed it. So rather than just write a check for $5 million, We basically had this tranche every 3 months. We got, $500,000, and we were very careful to report. Here's the cash flow. This is when we'll hit cash flow positive. This is when we'll hit break even. So they could pretty much see our progress as we tried to execute on the plan.
How important is collaboration when you're scaling your company?
Oh, it's vital. I mean, having those first 4 or 5 people, like, they will make or break your company. And so I think having a certain level of trust between all of you, but then just also appreciating that you're not the smartest person in the room, that other people could have good ideas. We had one guy in the lab named Johnny who was a technician, but he was brilliant when it came to how to modify the mix design, how to make changes. I mean, he was a vital part of our team.
Yes, it's been very, very insightful, Jason. So for the aspiring entrepreneur, you final words of thoughts or words of wisdom to them?
I think one of the greatest opportunities in this life is to create. I think we were born to innovate. We were born to create. I'm worried that as we get older, that gets kind of beaten out of us, and we just look for the path of least resistance. But there's nothing better than looking back on something that you created, and more importantly, that you created with the team. I mean, as I think back to 15 years ago, I don't really remember a lot about the profit that we made or the competitors that we beat out of the market, but I do remember those relationships. And I think creating something where you have a team that cares about each other, you remember how people treated you, and hopefully you remember how you treated others, and it just provides a whole new future. Like, having people out there that who trust you and that you can point to as friends. And I think it is scary at times, but there's definitely a way to do this and really be proud of what you've created.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you being with us today, Jason.
You bet. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us.